So, it's finally time again. Since I made my first MCU in chronological order video, I've had lots of requests to make an updated version. So, here I am. Before I start, I just want to say a couple things. In my OG video, I only included the Marvel movies, but now I have the movies, including Age of Ultron and Ant-Man, the TV shows, and the one-shots. Everything Marvel Studios has done in live action that has been displayed on some kind of screen. That means that I'm not including the spin-off comics. This is about the cinematic universe. Secondly, just to be clear, the MCU movies are only the Avengers movies. The old Spider-Man movies are with Sony. X-Men and Fantastic Four are with Fox. I know most of you know this, but there were some people on my original video that were confused about it. Also, in case it wasn't obvious, mega spoiler alert for every MCU movie and TV show and one-shot. Alright, the intro's been made, so let's start. So our story starts way back, before pretty much everything, when these massive titan things called the Celestials harness the power of the Infinity Stones, or gems, and wipe out civilizations. The Infinity Stones are basically these 6 little gems that are the most powerful objects in the universe. I have a whole video breaking them down if you want to see that. Basically, they can manipulate space, time, reality, power, the mind, and the soul. Keep these in mind, they kinda control the whole story. However, eventually, these Celestials are taken down, and the stones are dispersed throughout the entire universe. Fast forward a bit, an alien species known as the Kree, also known as the bad guys from Guardians of the Galaxy, they're traveling planets to find ways to fight their space enemies. They land on Earth and experiment on the humans they find there. Their experiments lead to the creation of some people who aren't human. In case you didn't get it, they're a new breed of people called the Inhumans. The Kree leave behind some artifacts for the Inhumans to get more power from. They leave a small underground city, and an actual Kree body is left behind, dead. His corpse just lying around waiting to be discovered. So let's get to 3000 BC. The Asgardians, these aliens/gods who live in a mythical place called Asgard, they were just chilling when this albino-looking guy called Malekith and his Dark Elves attack a realm called this. Their mission, destroy the universe, because that's just what Dark Elves do, I guess. The Asgardians win, and Bor, the head Asgardian and the father of Odin, hides this super powerful substance known as the Ether, which is one of those Infinity Stones and something those Dark Elves wanted, deep underground where no one will discover it until they do. So thanks, Bor doesn't really have the same ring to it. A couple of centuries later, in 965 AD, the Asgardians are at it again. This time they're fighting the Frost Giants, who use an item called the Casket of Ancient Winners to fight the gods. The Asgardians win again and jack the casket, but they're nice enough to make a peace treaty. Odin, who followed his father and is now the king of Asgard, also adopts an abandoned frost giant called Loki as his own, keeping the fact that he's not an actual god from him and raising him alongside his real son, Thor. Then sometime in the year 1000, that is in Earth years, the Kree are at war again, now with the Nova Empire, a space alien empire in a distant galaxy, if you're confused. They engage in a war that lasts thousands of years. About 400 years later, in 1400, Odin has somehow gotten his hands on the Tesseract, another Infinity Stone. So he does what any intelligent god would do with an object of immense power, and puts it on Earth. It ends up in Norway for some reason, never to be found again. In 1918, a kid called Steve Rogers is born on the 4th of July, because America! 12 years later, Steve meets this kid called Bucky Barnes, who becomes his BFF. Also, this German scientist called Dr. Erskine starts his research on a serum that will make a super strong, fast, agile super soldier. So then World War II starts, and this Nazi guy called Johann Schmidt gets his hands on a version of the previously mentioned serum, and he gives himself a healthy dose. Just kidding, it wasn't remotely healthy, and it turned him into a Red Skeletor. This guy then begins his search for the mystical Tesseract, because he wants to use it to take over the world, I guess. Around this time, Schmidt also recruits a scientist called Armin Zola, and starts his own little Nazi division called Hydra. Hydra is pretty much the second biggest thing to this story, so you're gonna want to keep that in mind as well. The next year, Steve Rogers attempts to join the army, but he gets rejected because he more or less resembles a shrimp. A bit after that, Schmidt goes to Norway, where he's heard tale of an object of immense power. He gets the Tesseract and takes it to his lab to make weapons out of it. The American government sees him doing this and is like, oh, hell no! So they look for a guy to become their super soldier. Erskine picks, you guessed it, Steve Rogers. So they give him the serum, and he's turned into the walking American flag, Captain America. Erskine then gets wasted, and after chasing the Nazi who did it, Cap decides to become more or less an advertising campaign, until some soldiers, including Bucky, get kidnapped by Hydra, which just puts Cap over the edge, and he goes to free them. While doing this, he runs into Schmidt, who's now going by the name of Red Skull, and he gives him a good old slap in the face. He then frees the soldiers, or the quote-unquote Howling Commandos, and returns to base. They then join the captain, and they fight and blow up Hydra guys in a rushed action montage. Around this time, Cap is also given an impenetrable shield, made of a substance that absorbs all vibration, known as vibranium. Also in this time, Cap falls in love with an agent who works for the army called Peggy Carter. Alright, so sometime after the discovery of the Tesseract, and listen up, because this part is vital to the story, some Hydra soldiers led by a guy called Werner Reinhardt, at least I think that's how you pronounce this, find that alien Kree corpse in North Africa that was left behind millions of years ago when the Kree did their experiments. The corpse is kept, and people discover it has some unique abilities, like potentially healing fatal wounds. Howard Stark, a brilliant playboy millionaire working with Captain America and the Army, also experiments with a small piece of what Hydra is using to power themselves, the Tesseract. This research is later used to help his son Tony create a new element. Now during a mission, Bucky falls off a train and is presumed dead, which really gets Cap down in the dumps. But don't worry Cap, the Russians are on it, as Bucky is found by some Russian Hydra guys and Armin Zola, the Red Skull's sidekick. Bucky is brainwashed into this evil guy, given a metal arm, and cryogenically frozen until further notice. That same guy who discovered the Kree alien corpse, Mr. Reinhardt, he also discovers the Obelisk, an artifact left behind by the Kree. Since this is also kind of important, I'm gonna take a sec to explain it. The Kree left behind an underground city that only Kree or Inhumans, people with powers created by the Kree, will be able to find. They then left behind artifacts like the Obelisk, which are essentially keys to that city. Therefore, only Inhumans can hold them. Any regular humans try to, and they get turned to rock. The artifacts, like the Obelisk, also release a mist that, once again, if you're human, you get turned to stone, but if you're inhuman, you get superpowers. I hope you're still with me. So Reinhardt goes to China, for some reason, and experiments on some Chinese villagers using the Obelisk, and one in particular is immune to its effects, as she is an Inhuman. Anyway, back to World War II. Cap then fights Red Skull on a plane, and Red Skull figures out right about now that the Tesseract is an Infinity Stone, and it teleports him somewhere in space. Cap then has no choice but to crash the plane and the Tesseract into some ice to save the world from destruction, going out in the blaze of glory. Soon after, while looking for Cap in the ice, Howard Stark finds the Tesseract and keeps it with him in the army. Howard then starts the organization that will eventually be known as SHIELD, or the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division, an organization designed to keep people safe, especially from the supernatural. One of the first things that SHIELD does is recruit Zola to work for them. Little do they know that Zola is actually planting Hydra people inside of SHIELD. Hydra then continues to spread secretly like a virus throughout SHIELD, unbeknownst to the higher-up good people of the organization. After this, Captain America's previous girlfriend, Peggy Carter, is working in an office of a SHIELD-like thing called the Strategic Scientific Reserve, or the SSR, where she's treated basically how women were treated in 1946. However, to prove herself, she goes on a mission all on her own, and because of her endeavors, Howard Stark promotes her to soon become the head of SHIELD with him. After this, without going into too much detail, Agent Carter has some adventures in the 40s with Howard and his butler, Edwin Jarvis. Some of the highlights include capturing Werner Reinhardt, interrogating him, sentencing him to life imprisonment, and taking that mysterious Kree alien corpse to SHIELD. Carter also stops Howard from being mind-controlled by Russians, and also works briefly with a Soviet SHIELD scientist called Anton Vanko. He'll be back in about 10 seconds. In these same string of events, she and the Howling Commandos discover a Soviet base where young girls are being trained to be super spies, not unlike another Russian super spy who was trained when she was young. In 1953, Carter gives an interview that will later be used in a Captain America exhibit, and that's all on her for now. In 1963, Howard Stark starts development on the arc reactor with Anton Vanko, an extremely powerful source of energy. However, Vanko is accused of espionage for the Russians and gets deported. He goes back to the USSR, but has to live in exile in Serbia. Stark then takes all the credit for the arc reactor, and with the help of his new business partner, Obadiah Stane, Stark Industries starts developing weapons. Also, around this time, Howard Stark stops looking like Dominic Cooper and starts looking like John Slattery. During this time, a hostage situation happens in Colombia, in which a relatively experienced SHIELD agent called Alexander Pierce meets a young, upcoming agent called Nick Fury, and Fury rescues the hostages, including Pierce's daughter. The two become good friends, and they have a long history that I won't get into, but basically, after this, Pierce starts working with Hydra, and becomes their biggest insider in SHIELD, and Fury keeps being a good guy, and goes on to become the director of SHIELD. 10 years later, Zola is told he's going to die, so he does what any reasonable person would do, and puts his mind into a giant 70s-style computer, which is kept in a SHIELD facility in New Jersey. Howard Stark also records a video introducing the Stark World Expo for 1974, briefly mentioning that new element that he was on to discover. Howard and his wife Maria also have a genius kid called Tony Stark around this time. The Stark World Expo then shuts down for a while, and Howard hides the key to making that new element in the plans for the Stark World Expo. In 1975, a man called Bill Fisk runs for city council in Hell's Kitchen, a part of New York, but he gets ridiculed for it. Unfortunately, he's an abusive husband and an abusive father, so one night while he's taking his anger out on his wife, his son, Wilson Fisk, has had enough of it and beats his dad to death with a hammer. Wilson and his mom dispose of the body, and the traumatized son moves to a farm and stays with some relatives. Eventually, he moves to Asia, where he becomes allies with the Japanese and Chinese mob. So sometime around here, a promising young scientist called Hank Pym is recruited by SHIELD. After a bit of research, he discovers a science that he names Pym particles, that, without getting into all the complicated sciencey stuff, can make things super small and can make things super big. After this, just because he can, he makes a device that allows him to communicate with ants. He starts fighting baddies under the name Ant-Man, and becomes somewhat of an early superhero. He also has some help from his wife, Janet Van Dyne, who has her own Ant-Man suit. She becomes known as the Wasp. So in the early 80s, an Inhuman called Gordon undergoes his Inhuman transformation due to a Kree artifact like the Obelisk, releasing that superpower-granting mist. The transformation takes away his eyes, but gives him teleportation. In 1986, a young actor called Trevor Slattery films the pilot for a TV show called Caged Heat, in which, among other things, a monkey drinks vodka. For some reason or another, the show is cancelled. In 87, Hank Pym and his wife Janet are out on a regular old mission defusing a Soviet ICBM, or Intercontinental Ballistic Missile for all you kids at home. However, they can't penetrate the titanium outer shell, so Janet uses her shrinking powers to go subatomic subatomic in order to defuse the bomb and save her husband's life. However, in going subatomic, she slips into the subatomic quantum realm. That basically means that she keeps shrinking for all eternity, with no end, where time and space become meaningless. In 1988, a kid called Peter Quill gets abducted by an avatar-looking alien after watching his mom die. He's taken away by Yondu and his space gang, some aliens that were recruited to take Quill back to his alien father. But for whatever reason, they decide against doing that, and they and Quill have many ravaging adventures together. So in 89, Hank Pym suspects that the people running S.H.I.E.L.D., that would be Howard Stark and Peggy Carter, are trying to steal his Pym Particles technology. He quits S.H.I.E.L.D., and his company Pymtech is slowly handed off to his assistant Darren Cross, who actually believes the legends that Hank used to shrink down and fight crime, despite Hank calling them tall tales. He dedicates a lot of his time leading Pymtech to trying to replicate the Pymtech, so he too can shrink down and take over the world. Also, because of his wife's death and him quitting S.H.I.E.L.D. and his overall stressful life, Hank sends his young daughter Hope Van Dyne off to a boarding school, making him somewhat of an emotionally distant father. Don't forget about Hank Pym, Darren Cross, and Hope Van Dyne just yet, because they'll be back by the end of the story. After serving 44 years of his sentence, that Nazi guy called Werner Reinhardt is released by Alexander Pierce, who is now just the biggest Hydra buff. And Reinhardt goes back to China and finds that Inhuman lady whom he had experimented on decades ago. He discovers she hasn't aged a day in over 4 decades. Using the data from some more experiments on her, he de-ages himself and goes back to what he looked like in 1945. He changes his name to Daniel Whitehall and continues his life. That Inhuman lady actually had a kid with a normal guy called Calvin Zabo. Their daughter, Daisy Johnson, who by the way is also an Inhuman, is put into St. Agnes Orphanage. This is where she adopts the name Skye. In 1990, a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent called John Garrett steps on a bomb and gets blown to bits. He gets put back together by a corporation called Cybertech, which is run by Hydra, and he's basically turned into this RoboCop Terminator guy with metal limbs. He becomes the first in Hydra's Project Deathlock, basically one of Hydra's many attempts to create a super soldier army. A bit after that, he starts the Centipede program, a new program designed to create super soldiers using a special serum. His codename is the Clairvoyant. If Hydra's plans and codenames get a bit confusing, just remember that their end goal is always to create a super soldier army and take over the world. In 1991, Howard Stark and his wife Maria are deemed threats to Hydra, and are killed in a car crash. Tony Stark, their only child, inherits the company Stark Industries the next year, still working with his dad's old bald business partner Obadiah Stane. So then sometime in the early 90s, a kid in Hell's Kitchen called Matt Murdock gets in an accident and gets covered in dangerous chemicals. He blinks them in and becomes blind, but all of his other senses are enhanced, giving him a different way to see. His dad, who's a boxer, supports him in his efforts to carry on as a normal boy, but his dad gets killed for messing with the wrong people. However, Matt is a kid with great intentions, so after staying at St. Agnes Orphanage, Link, he starts training in martial arts with the help of another blind guy called Stick, so he can become someone who can keep his city safe. In 93, Ivan Vanko, the son of Anton Vanko, remember him, gets imprisoned for 15 years for selling Soviet secrets to Pakistan. In 1995, a nerdy guy called Bruce Banner and a nerdy girl called Betty Ross meet at Harvard and start dating. They do science stuff and dangerous experiments together that won't possibly ever go wrong. That same year, a young Russian woman called Natasha Romanoff joins that Russian secret spy program and trains intensely for 3 years. She becomes one of the most effective killers in the world and gets the nickname Black Widow. However, she's so good at her job that 3 years later, Nick Fury, who's been working his way up the ranks of S.H.I.E.L.D., discovers her and sends a highly skilled S.H.I.E.L.D. agent called Clint Barton, who also goes by the name of Hawkeye, to take her out. He finds her, but he doesn't kill her, because reasons. Instead, he offers her a chance to work as a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. She accepts, and the two become good friends and work together on many missions. Fury comes to like Black Widow, and she becomes one of the highest ranking S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. So meanwhile, on the opposite side of the spectrum, this young man called Grant Ward burns down his family's house. John Garrett, remember, Mr. Deathlock? He sees potential in Grant and recruits him as an agent of Hydra. For his training, Grant is left in the wilderness for 5 years, with Garrett occasionally checking in and giving him new challenges to turn him into a cold-blooded killer for Hydra. In 99, on the big New Year's Eve, Tony Stark, who's still just rolling around being a billionaire weapons creator, is confronted by Aldrich Killian, a super nerdy guy who talks to him about a new program that he's developing called Extremis. Tony's all like, I'll meet you on the roof. Unfortunately, he forgets and doesn't show up to the meeting. Killian is pretty upset about it, and he vows revenge. Seems a bit extreme for just missing a meeting, but whatever, man, do your thing. Killian recruits the scientist Maya Hansen, ironically enough the girl Stark was with on that very night, to continue his research into the Extremis virus, a virus that can repair cells and grow back limbs and let you shoot fire from your mouth. So Stark Industries has been developing weapons for quite some time at this point. In a small Eastern European country called Sokovia gets hit by some Stark bombs. Two twins called Wanda and Pietro Maximoff watch as the weapons kill their parents. They also vow vengeance on Stark and America and all the things in between. So then General Thunderbolt Ross, the father of the girl Bruce Banner is dating, manages to convince the government to reactivate the long-gone super soldier program, so the country could have their own little army of Captain Americas. In 2004, John Garrett comes back to Grant Ward in the forest and lets him know that his training is done and that he'll be working inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. as a secret double agent for Hydra. That same year, two science geeks, Leo Fitz and Gemma Simmons, graduate S.H.I.E.L.D. High and start working for the organization. Because he's such a nice guy, Bruce Banner sees his girlfriend's dad's efforts and says, I can do that. So he joins the new super soldier program and tries to recreate the serum that was used to make Cap back in the day. However, the project ends up having a lack of funding, and so the team decides to test the serum on Banner himself. The experiment, also involving gamma rays, fails miserably and curses Banner with the fact that every time his pulse goes really fast, he transforms transforms into a giant green rage-induced killing machine, which becomes known as the Hulk. After the experiment goes wrong and Banner almost kills Betty and General Ross, he runs away and the manhunt for Banner begins. He travels from country to country, occasionally hulking out and wreaking havoc wherever he goes, with some witnesses calling him a green Sasquatch. After a couple of months of that routine, Banner has had enough and decides to shoot himself on the North Pole. But of course, the suicide attempt fails, as he turns into the Hulk and immediately recovers. After this, the military and General Ross lose him for a bit. At this time, a guy called Scott Lang is working at a company called VistaCorp, but he finds out that this company has been stealing money from customers. So because of this, he steals $400K from the company, only to get arrested and put in prison for a few years. A few years after this, he divorces his wife Maggie, aka the mom from Jurassic World, who is then left with their daughter Cassie. Eventually, Maggie finds a new husband in the form of a policeman called Paxton. Around this time, Aldrich Killian decides to follow the trend and test a serum on himself, and the extremist serum that he created cures him of his diseases, so that he doesn't have to walk with a cane anymore, and it also gives him other perks, like this one. So some more Inhumans come to light at this point, and by that I mean a trail of bodies lead to them. Phil Coulson, an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury's right-hand man, also keep him in mind because he's pretty pivotal to the story, goes with Melinda May, also an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., to shut down the killer Inhuman. They do succeed, but May is traumatized by the experience because it turns out that the killer was a little girl, and May was forced to shoot her in the face. May retires to a desk job at S.H.I.E.L.D. and gets the nickname The Cavalry from the experience. Killian is very excited after seeing the results of his extremist test, so he goes out and experiments on other people. A couple don't survive and explode, but those that do become Killian's henchmen. However, one man who couldn't take the extremist blew up in Rose Hill, Tennessee, killing 5 people. It was called a suicide bombing, but it was the first in a long chain of similar explosions. So around this time, Black Widow's on a regular old S.H.I.E.L.D. mission, escorting scientists in Iran, when bam! She gets a first-hand experience with the Winter Soldier. Remember Cap's old friend Bucky who got brainwashed by Hydra? He's been on all sorts of assassin missions lately. The Winter Soldier kills the scientist and injures Black Widow, leaving her with a permanent scar. Nick Fury, now the actual director of S.H.I.E.L.D., decides that the world needs something more than just men in suits to protect it. So he and S.H.I.E.L.D. start the Avengers Initiative, a program that is designed to get together a group of people who could fight the battles that normal people never could. But Nick Fury isn't done with changes just yet. He also puts Phil Coulson in charge of Project Tahiti, which, let me just break it down real quick. Tahiti pretty much involves extracting bodily fluids from that Kree corpse that was found by Reinhardt. These fluids have super healing powers and can bring people back from the dead. Fury wanted to use this to potentially save a dying Avenger. So Tony Stark is now a billionaire with an assistant/girlfriend, Pepper Potts. He's living the good life, partying, drinking, making tons of money off of weapons with his best friend who's totally not evil. However, on a trip to show off his new Jericho missiles, Stark gets captured by a terrorist organization called the Ten Rings. With the help of a man called Jensen, who was also captured by the terrorists, Tony manages to escape using a weaponized suit of armor. The suit is powered by an arc reactor, this little glowy power source put in Tony Stark's chest to stop the shrapnel near his heart from killing him. The suit he used to escape breaks down and is left in the desert, and Stark is picked up by one of his good friends, James Rhodey Rhodes. However, Tony saw what his weapons could do, like, I don't know, kill people. He promptly shuts down his weapons division. Instead, he continues research on the arc reactor and upgrades that armor he used, until it looks like this. He goes off and fights some terrorists who turn out to be in league with Obadiah Stane. Stark realizes that right about here, and decides to fight his old friend, who uses a bigger version of Stark's first suit. Tony kills Stane in a not really that climactic battle, and everyone's happy. While all that was happening, that blind guy, who's now really a blind ninja, Matt Murdock, he goes to college and meets Foggy Nelson, who is his roommate. They then become actual mates and look forward to a life of fighting crime, but as lawyers. After all the craziness that went down with Stane, Tony Stark reveals to the world that he's the superhero now dubbed Iron Man.
I am Iron Man.
And is then promptly confronted by Nick Fury, who sees potential in him as someone who could be an Avenger. Also, in Russia, Ivan Vanko watches Tony Stark's big press reveal, while his dad, Anton Vanko, dies in front of him, telling him that that should be him. Ivan says, alright then, and using the research from when his dad and Howard Stark worked together, he harnesses the arc reactor technology and uses it to create long electrical whips that he can kill Tony Stark with. Now back to this guy. Bruce Banner, still on the run from the government, but not having had an incident for a while, moves to Rio, where he works in a soda factory. While there, he also contacts Dr. Samuel Stearns, a guy who could potentially create a cure for the Hulk. However, one day at the factory, Bruce cuts his hand, and some of his super Hulk blood gets into a drink. That drink is shipped around the world, where it unfortunately kills some guy whose face I can't quite put my finger on. Anyway, the government and Ross discover the death, figure out where the bottle is from, and head out to find their big green suspect. So Tony Stark, who's working on creating world peace using the Iron Man suits, starts up the Stark World Expo 2010. However, he's got more important stuff to worry about. His arc reactor is poisoning him, and he's slowly but surely dying. Not only that, but the government also wants to have control of his suits. Stark appears before the Senate, tells the senators to beat it, and then goes ahead and makes his girlfriend the CEO of his company. But he's also got more problems, as a Ten Rings associate gives Ivan Vanko tickets to Monaco, and a way into the Grand Prix, which Tony Stark will be a part of. Meanwhile, General Ross and his crew arrive in Rio and surprise attack Banner, who hulks out and runs off into the sunset, finding himself in Guatemala. At this point, Bruce just throws safety and reason out the window and goes to Culver University, which is where his old lover Betty Ross is. Meanwhile, a scientist called Jane Foster discovers that there have been a lot of weather disturbances in New Mexico, so she heads out there to investigate. Tony meets a woman called Natalie Rushman, who's actually Black Widow sent in undercover by Nick Fury to keep an eye on Tony. Anyway, he heads out to the Monaco Grand Prix, where he does what billionaire playboys are born to do and actually drives in it. He is, however, attacked by Ivan Vanko, who from now on I'll just call Whiplash. Tony then gets on his coolest Iron Man suit and beats the living crap out of this guy. However, he's quick to escape prison with the help of Justin Hammer, a business rival of Stark's. Hammer asks Whiplash to build him suits that'll make Iron Man look like an antique, so naturally he builds him a bunch of gray drones. So Tony decides to drink away his problems, and on his May 10th birthday, he gets completely drunk and fights his BFF Rhodey in his Iron Man suit. Rhodey knocks out Tony and flies the suit to Justin Hammer, who upgrades it and creates War Machine, which is to be shown off at the Stark World Expo along with all the drones. Fury then comes out of the shadows and meets Tony again, but this time he finds out that Tony only has 72 hours left to live due to the arc reactor poisoning. So he gives him a little medicine that will slow the poisoning down so Tony can go find a cure. Jane Foster, still working on the New Mexico case, contacts a scientist called Eric Selvig to figure out what's up with the weather. S.H.I.E.L.D. intercepts the message and decides that something fishy is going on down there, so they decide to send some people. Agent Phil Coulson gets reassigned to New Mexico, and on the way there, he stops an armed robbery using his wit, a bag of flour, and his foot. So Tony eventually does find the cure, hidden in the Stark World Expo by his dad. He creates the new element, puts it in his chest, and it stops the poisoning. He arrives in his newly powered Iron Man suit at Hammer's presentation, just as Whiplash hijacks all the drones and makes him try to kill Iron Man. He also hijacks the War Machine armor and makes Rhodey try to murder his best friend. However, with the help of Black Widow, Rhodey gets control back in his suit, and he and Tony defeat all the drones and Whiplash in his all new and improved big bad suit. So let's move away from Earth and back to the home of the gods, Asgard, where Thor, the son of Odin, and his compatriots have been having lots of adventures for thousands of years, and now Thor's getting coronated. However, his coronation is interrupted by some frost giants breaking in and stealing the casket of ancient winters. Remember that thing? Thor is understandably pretty upset about this, and despite his father ordering him to stay, he takes his friends across the Rainbow Road to Jotunheim, where the frost giants live. After a quick battle, Odin is forced to come over there and bail him out. And because Thor broke the Sacred Peace Treaty that had kept the 9 realms from chaos, Odin banishes Thor to Earth so he can learn some humility. Thor is pretty much immediately found by Jane Foster, Eric Selvig, and their friend Darcy Lewis. They bring Thor to a hospital, but he escapes. At this point, S.H.I.E.L.D. sends Hawkeye in to help with the situation. Some local New Mexicans find Thor's hammer, and Phil Coulson arrives at the site. Back in Asgard, Loki finds out that he is a frost giant and not an Asgardian. Loki is extremely enraged, and with his brother not there to stop him, he takes over Asgard. And right after he does this, Odin decides to take a nap which lasts quite some time. So just for a little bit here, there are going to be 3 stories intercutting with each other, so I'm just going to go in between all of them. Thor breaks into the S.H.I.E.L.D. site with his hammer, but he gets captured. Hawkeye arrives to help out, but he just does nothing. At the same time, Bruce Banner finally meets up with Betty Ross, and they hide out at a hotel. Black Widow is also sent to start trailing Banner at this point, as he could potentially be useful for the Avengers. Thor then breaks out of captivity after having a chat with Loki, and finds Jane Foster, who he bonds with, and they end up becoming a couple. The Warriors 3 and Sif, some of Thor's friends from Asgard, arrive on Earth to help him out. Back at Culver University, Banner gets attacked by the US military. He hulks out and fights them. Then he runs off and hides out with Betty. He then goes off to meet Samuel Stearns, the guy with the cure. After Banner leaves Stearns, whose cure didn't work, an army officer by the name of Emil Blonsky takes a version of the Hulk serum and becomes this weird spine creature called Abomination. Nick Fury then decides, instead of heading out to Thor or Hulk, I'll go talk to Tony Stark. So he goes and informs Stark that he's not recommended for the Avengers program, as he is compulsive, self-destructive, and narcissistic. Loki's then gotten bored, I guess, so he sends a giant killbot called the Destroyer to kill Thor. However, Thor defeats it because he's learned his lesson and has become worthy again. Thor gets his hammer back and heads up to Asgard, where he faces off against Loki. To put an end to Loki's schemes, Thor destroys the Bifrost Rainbow Bridge, meaning he can never go back to Earth. Psych, Loki subsequently falls into space, presumed to be dead, and Odin awakens. However, Loki isn't actually dead because this is a superhero movie, and he actually gets picked up by a big purple spaceman called Thanos. This guy is probably the most important to the story. So Thanos basically wants complete control over the universe, as you do. And to do that, he needs one thing. Actually, 6 things. The 6 Infinity Stones. Those little gems of immense power. They're spread out all across the universe, and the only way to harness them is by wearing the Infinity Gauntlet, which is in Odin's treasure vault. So Thanos wants to get all the stones, so he can get the universe, basically. So he tells Loki, here's your mystical staff, which oddly enough contains one of the stones, and here's an army of aliens. Invade Earth and have your revenge, but bring back the Tesseract, which remember is one of the stones. Loki says, alright, cool, and prepares for his invasion. Back on Earth, Abomination just starts wrecking his way through Harlem, so Banner, now captured with General Ross and the military, jumps out of a chopper to unleash the Hulk. He and Abomination have their slap fight until Abomination is defeated. He is sent off to Alaska in a cryo tank. Banner decides to head to another place, opting to settle in Bella Coola, where he can rage out whenever he wants. However, he soon gets bored of Canada and moves to India, where he becomes a trusted local doctor and is still being monitored by S.H.I.E.L.D. With all these heroes coming to light, Nick Fury asks the World Security Council, or these people at the head of the government and S.H.I.E.L.D. and all that, for more funding for the Avengers Initiative, and so he can look more carefully at the Tesseract, which is still in the control of S.H.I.E.L.D. After what happened in New Mexico, Fury recruits Eric Selvig to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. on research involving the Tesseract. Selvig accepts the offer, as the spirit of Loki watches over, I guess. Back in Hell's Kitchen, New York, Matt Murdock is having trouble sleeping, because he can hear the life of the city. Every night he hears a girl being abused by her father, so one day he decides to make a difference. He does this by putting on a mask and using his martial arts skills to beat the hell out of the father. father. From then on, he continues going out at night and stopping the crimes of his city. So as more and more extremist explosions begin to happen, Aldrich Killian decides to cover up the explosions by creating a fake terrorist known as the Mandarin, based on an actual terrorist leader of the Ten Rings. He chooses Trevor Slattery, now a washed-up drunk, to portray his puppet terrorist. Now the government has a face to put behind the bombings. So the World Security Council decided that Abomination could be a useful player on the Avengers team. This is a big problem, because remember, he's a jerk. So Phil Coulson and another S.H.I.E.L.D. agent called Jasper Sitwell meet up in a cafe and discuss how to stop General Ross, who's leading this movement, from putting the Abomination on the team. In the end, they decide to send in the Consultant, the code name for Tony Stark. Stark meets with Ross in a bar and enrages the General so much that he no longer wants to do anything with S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. starts to have more concerns though, as more Mandarin bombings start to come to light. Phil Coulson, who is still in charge of that resurrection program, Project Tahiti, contacts Nick Fury and requests that it be shut down, because side effects include memory damage and insanity. But turns out Nick Fury doesn't care about that, so the project continues. Just when the Avengers initiative was looking like it couldn't get any better, some guys in the Arctic find the frozen body of Captain America. S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes that the first Avenger is still alive, and they begin to thaw his body. Cap wakes up soon after this and is confronted by Nick Fury, who lets him know that he's been asleep for 70 years. Cap starts training with S.H.I.E.L.D. Hawkeye is sent to help out Eric Selvig on his Tesseract research, and soon after, Nick Fury, Phil Coulson, and Fury's friend and trusted helper, Agent Maria Hill, arrive at the site as well. The Tesseract then creates a portal, and Loki comes through, staff and all. He takes control of the minds of Hawkeye and Eric Selvig, grabs the Tesseract, and heads into the sunset. Fury officially calls for the Avengers to be activated. Black Widow, who's been trailing Banner for a while, meets with him in India and brings him in for S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson meets Tony Stark and lets him know that despite the fact that he wasn't recommended for the Avengers, desperate times call for desperate measures, and he's on the team. Cap, Black Widow, and Banner meet on the helicarrier, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s giant floating fortress, while Thor, who has just heard the news that his brother is alive, gets back on Earth without the Bifrost because Odin used some quote-unquote dark magic. Loki is then found in Germany, and Iron Man and Cap take him captive, but Thor finds them and gets in a fight over Loki with Cap and Iron Man. However, they all become friends and take Loki in on the helicarrier. However, this was all part of Loki's plan, because soon after, Hawkeye breaks him out. Hawkeye gets unmind controlified because Black Widow hits him in the face. However, the rest of the Avengers are split up, and Loki stabs Phil Coulson through the heart, killing him. Kind of. The death of Coulson puts the team over the edge and actually gives them something to avenge. They all assemble in New York just as Loki opens a portal to space and lets in his alien army. The Avengers fight the aliens, and Iron Man carries a nuke through the portal and blows up the alien mothership, stopping the invasion. However, he temporarily dies out in space, but comes back because Hulk roared at him. What the hell? The Avengers then split up. Tony goes back to billionaire things, Bruce Banner goes back to sciencing, Thor takes Loki back to Asgard where he's put in prison, Black Widow goes off to electrocute some people, and Hawkeye goes back to being no one's favorite character. But best of all, Captain America decides that if he's going to live in this world, he might as well have some skills. So he joins S.H.I.E.L.D. and starts training with the help of Black Widow and Nick Fury. His fighting style then begins to evolve into some seriously awesome acrobatic kung fu. The leader of those aliens that Loki was controlling, called the Chitauri by the way, lets Thanos know that Loki failed. But Thanos isn't too upset apparently, he just starts smiling. In the aftermath of the Battle of New York, lots of Chitauri tech is lying around, and people start to pick it up. Some firefighters find a Chitauri helmet and hang it in their firehouse, but more importantly, a couple find a Chitauri gun and use it to rob banks. However, Agent Jasper Sitwell soon hears about this, and goes in to take them down. But instead of killing them, he brings them in as S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Now, more and more explosions start popping up around the world from failed extremist tests, and the government is becoming more and more concerned about the Mandarin. President Ellis publicly speaks out against him, and in response to all the bombings, Rhodey, who still works with the army, gets his War Machine armor, a paint job, and becomes Iron Patriot, because America! So Phil Coulson's death was a traumatizing experience for S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Avengers, but Nick Fury didn't want his best agent to die, so he let Coulson become the first real subject for Project Tahiti. The fluids from the Kree corpse are pumped into his body, and he's brought back to life, but because of the extremely painful and nightmarish experience, his brain is fiddled around with, and he's given fake memories of going on vacation to Tahiti, where he recovered from his injuries. Fury instructs everyone to not tell Coulson the truth about his resurrection, because it could result in a mental breakdown. Up in Asgard, Loki is locked up in a high-security cell, and Thor is a renowned hero. Also, using the Tesseract that is now in their possession, the Asgardians rebuild the Bifrost. Tony Stark is also now having panic attacks, and is unable to sleep due to pretty much dying up in the alien wormhole. He spends his free time building all kinds of different Iron Man suits, going all the way up to 42. However, Tony's close friend and bodyguard, Happy Hogan, gets seriously wounded in an extremist bombing, which everyone assumes is another Mandarin attack. Tony's pretty mad, so he tells the Mandarin to come and get him, which the Mandarin does. After his mansion is attacked and the world and his girlfriend presume him to be dead, he hides out with that kid from Jurassic World, and is pursued by some extremist soldiers until he figures out where the Mandarin is hiding out. He gets some gear together and breaks into the Mandarin's secret lair, only to find Trevor Slattery inside. After a brief conversation, Tony is knocked out and captured by Aldrich Killian, who explains all of his nefarious plans. The extremist henchmen also take over the Iron Patriot suit, and while Rhodey manages to escape, the suit flies off with an extremist guy in it, and Air Force One is attacked. The president is kidnapped, but Tony manages to save all the other attendants aboard the flight. Killian is going to kill the president live on TV, but Tony and Rhodey show up just in the nick of time. Tony summons all of his 42 Iron Man suits to come save the day, and a big, epic climactic battle ensues. Rhodey rescues the president, and Pepper gets injected with the extremist serum. However, Pepper doesn't explode, and instead kills Killian. Tony blows up all his suits, even though he's going to rebuild them later on. He gets some doctors to remove the extremist from Pepper, and while he's at it, he removes the shrapnel near his heart, negating the need for the arc reactor, which he then just just throws into the ocean. After all of this, Stark decides to sit down with Bruce Banner and discuss his experiences. So now that Coulson is alive and well again, he wants to put together a special team to help contain superpowered people and such things. He recruits Melinda May, who's forced to come out of her desk job, Fitz and Simmons, who are the team's brains, and Grant Ward, who, if you'll recall, is an insider for Hydra. Also, that Inhuman girl called Skye, she's now all grown up and a hacker for the Rising Tide, which is a, quote, hacktivist group that want to put S.H.I.E.L.D. secrets all over the web. She also really wants to find out about her mysterious Inhuman parents. S.H.I.E.L.D. isn't too happy with the Rising Tide spreading bad rumors about them, so they go in and find Skye, taking her aboard for questioning. However, Coulson sees the potential in her and recruits her onto his team. This S.H.I.E.L.D. team has lots of adventures that I can't go into here, but one of the main things they deal with are people exposed to the Centipede Serum, a serum that mixes Extremis, Gamma Tech, and the Super Soldier Serum. Basically every superpower in the MCU in one dose. The Centipede program is still run by John Garrett, and therefore is run by Hydra. Anyway, back in the realm of Asgard, Thor has been fighting to keep peace in the Nine Realms. He wins a battle at Vanaheim, and goes back to his place to celebrate. However, bad things are coming, because all the planets are aligning, or something like that. Basically, because of this aligning, portals between the Nine Realms start appearing, and Jane Foster ends up getting transported through one of these portals to where Bor hid the ether, and she then gets infected with it. Because of the ether becoming active again, Malekith the Dark Elf awakens, along with all of his Dark Elf buddies. Thor realizes that Jane has the ether, aka an Infinity Stone, in her, and takes her to Asgard so she can get help. The Dark Elves track the mythical substance and attack Asgard. In the attack, the Dark Elves shank Thor's mom, and that really gets Thor in a mood. He's so desperate to find and kill these guys that he enlists the help of Loki. The two brothers track him back to Svart Realm, and there's a battle. Malekith ends up taking the ether out of Jane and uses it to make himself Super Malekith. During this battle, Loki is also supposedly killed, but he actually sneaks back to Asgard and somehow incapacitates Odin, using his trickery to take the throne for himself. Malekith tries to destroy the world, but in the end, Thor defeats him in a battle of portals. With the Dark Elves defeated, Thor returns to Asgard, where he declines the throne to Odin/Loki. The ether is taken by Sif and Volstagg, two of Thor's friends, off into the far edges of the galaxy and given to the Collector, a really weird-looking guy who, and I know it's hard to believe, collects things. Collects things like Infinity Stones, Dark Elves, Chitauri, Slither monsters, Horseface, Thor lookalikes, anthropomorphic ducks, all kinds of stuff. Back on Earth, Coulson's S.H.I.E.L.D. team comes out and has to clean up the mess left behind by Thor and his battle in London. The S.H.I.E.L.D. team continue with more super investigations, and while this happens, Coulson discovers the truth behind Tahiti, and how he was brought back to life by a blue alien corpse. Around this time as well, Trevor Slattery has been sent to Seagate Prison, the same one housing Justin Hammer. He's considered a bit of a celebrity there. However, when sat down to have an interview about his experiences, the interviewer shoots the guards and takes Slattery in. Turns out the actual Mandarin wasn't very happy about someone stealing his name and identity. Who would have thought? After many years of taking part in riots, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff volunteer for experiments led by Baron von Strucker, who's one of the main players for Hydra. He's gotten his hands on Loki's scepter, which remember contains an Infinity Stone, and he's using it to give people super abilities. The twins volunteer because they believe it's for a better Sokovia. Turns out no one survives the experiments except for those two, who are granted enhanced supernatural gifts. In short,
he's fast and she's weird.
So for all this time, Cap has been training with S.H.I.E.L.D., which is kind of ironic, since it means he's been training with Hydra. Cap has also befriended a previous soldier called Sam Wilson, who used to be a paratrooper with mechanical wings. Cap and Black Widow go to free hostages from a ship, but Cap discovers that Black Widow is getting info from the ship's computers. He angrily asks Nick Fury what's up with that, and Fury tells him about Project Insight, which basically consists of 3 helicarriers hooked up to some satellites that can kill terrorists and criminals immediately when needed.
This is Project Insight. 3 next-generation helicarriers synced to a network of targeting satellites. These new long-range precision guns can eliminate 1,000 hostiles a minute. The satellites can read a terrorist's DNA before he steps outside his spider hole.
However, after a few days, Fury is attacked by the Winter Soldier, who was sent by Hydra to take him out, as he is their biggest threat. Fury fakes his own death, and Captain America becomes a fugitive, because S.H.I.E.L.D. is now run by Alexander Pierce. Cap and Black Widow fight the Winter Soldier, and Cap finds out that he's his old buddy Bucky from World War II, which is pretty shocking. A trail of breadcrumbs lead Cap and Black Widow to find Armin Zola's old computer face, where Zola reveals that Hydra has been growing inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. all along, and that Hydra was planning to use those 3 helicarriers from Project Insight to wipe out anyone who opposed them.
Bruce Banner, Stephen Strange, anyone who's a threat.
Basically, in the end, Cap, Black Widow, Nick Fury, and Sam Wilson, who uses his old mechanical wings to become the superhero sidekick Falcon, defeat the Hydra carriers, and Alexander Pierce gets shot and killed. Cap also faces off against the Winter Soldier, who remembers at the last minute that he used to be Bucky Barnes, and so he saves his old friend's life. Bucky then goes off to learn about his past at the one place he can, the Smithsonian. Because of the fact that S.H.I.E.L.D. is basically run by a bunch of crazy Nazis, the Avengers begin to get back together. Cap goes off to bring the team back, while Falcon continues to search for Bucky. Tony Stark decides that he can't be everywhere at once, so he creates these Avengers bots, or the new and improved Iron Legion, a bunch of Iron Man-looking robots that fly around helping the world. So you may be wondering, if S.H.I.E.L.D. is torn apart, what happens to the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. team? Well, Coulson and his crew discovered that Ward and Grant are Hydra, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is branded a terrorist organization. Nick Fury decides to go help his people for once, and after a long battle, Ward is locked up, Garrett is disintegrated, and Phil Coulson is reassigned as the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., and given the task of rebuilding S.H.I.E.L.D., bigger, better, stronger, all that. So let's now move off into space. The Kree Empire, thousands of years after they created the Inhumans on Earth, are still at war with the Nova Empire. The two warring empires are still trying to make peace, but a Kree fanatic known as Ronan the Accuser refuses peace because he's the bad guy. guy. He also teams up with Thanos to help him get all of those Infinity Stones. Speaking of which, that kid who got kidnapped, Peter Quill, he's now something of a space Ravager mercenary, following in Yondu's footsteps. He discovers one of those precious Infinity Stones inside of an orb on an abandoned planet. Ronan discovers this and sends his troops to get it. Quill gets away, but he refuses to share the wealth with Yondu and his buddies, because after all, there is no honor among thieves. So Ronan and Yondu are now both after Quill, but he still goes to Xandar, the capital of the Nova Empire, to sell the Infinity Stone. He gets attacked by a green lady called Gamora, who is the unhappy adopted child of Thanos. The reason she's unhappy is Thanos murdered her family and forced her to become his daughter, so she plans on betraying him and selling the stone to the Collector, who offered a lot of money for it.
4 billion units.
What? Holy shit.
However, both of them are attacked by a scientifically engineered raccoon called Rocket and a talking tree called Groot, who want that bounty that has been placed on Quill's head. In the end, they're all captured by the Nova police and locked up in the kiln. All 4 of these misfits decide to team up, escape, sell the stone to the Collector, and split the profits. So they get out of there, and along the way pick up a guy called Drax the Destroyer, a guy who also wants to get back at Ronan because he killed his wife and child. The new team meet the Collector on a planet called Nowhere. This is where they discover that they've been carrying an Infinity Stone around this whole time, and the entire place gets trashed by it. Long story short, the team meets up with Yondu and his Ravagers and the Nova Corps to take down Ronan before he destroys Xandar. By the end of a somewhat long battle, Quill, Gamora, Rocket, and Drax grab the Infinity Stone and share the burden of it. They use it to kill Ronan and save Xandar. Here they adopt the name the Guardians of the Galaxy. Peace is created between the Kree and Nova Empires, and the Guardians go off to more crazy adventures. So now let's move down to Earth and get grounded, and gritty and dark. Because of all the destruction left behind by the Chitauri invasion a few years back, a bunch of house prices drop and such boring finance things, but this especially affects Hell's Kitchen, which is now even more of a hellhole. Basically, a bunch of jerks take advantage of the situation, which leads to more mobsters, more triad members, more Russian gangsters to come out of the dark. Matt Murdock is still blindly fighting crime, while also balancing it with his religion, and being a lawyer with his pal Foggy Nelson and their new friend Karen Page. During this time, Wilson Fisk also returns to Hell's Kitchen to rebuild the city and make it a better place in his eyes. Matt fights against him, since he's kinda deranged, and along the way, Foggy finds out about Matt's nighttime activities. While he has trouble fighting Fisk at first, the death of not one but 2 of Matt's close friends pushes him to get Fisk locked up, while also getting a stylish new outfit. The city also gives him a new nickname, Daredevil. So meanwhile, S.H.I.E.L.D. is still continuing to fight Hydra. Ward escapes captivity and kills his brother. So Daniel Whitehall, that big Hydra guy who de-aged himself with experiments from Sky's Inhuman mom, he resurfaces, and he gets his hand on the Obelisk, which is, if you remember, the key to that alien city created by the Kree. Due to the Kree blood in his system from Tahiti, Coulson has started etching out a map of the city in hopes of finding it. So Calvin Zabo, who is the father of Sky and the husband of that Inhuman lady, wants desperately to see his daughter, and so orders another Inhuman called Reyna to bring her to him. However, in a bizarre turn of events, Coulson ends up killing Whitehall, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. team finds the Kree city. Sky and Reyna put the Obelisk back in its rightful place, where it releases that gas that given humans their transformations, like that guy Gordon who got his eyes removed from earlier. Because of their inhumanness, the two get superhuman abilities. Sky gets vibration-related powers, meaning she can cause earthquakes, and Reyna is given the ability to see the future, but she is also horribly disfigured and covered in spikes. However, that guy Gordon comes and takes her off to an inhuman kinda day camp. He also takes Sky and her dad, and Sky finally meets her mom for the first time. With help from her mom, Sky learns how to control her powers. Ward also briefly turns to the good side to help out his previous team. In the end, Sky, Ward, Fitz, Simmons, May, and Coulson all get back together to find Baron von Strucker. They do, and Coulson gives his location to Maria Hill, who forwards it to the Avengers. Coulson also recommissions an old helicarrier for Fury, so he can use it in the upcoming series of unfortunate events. So the Avengers, who have now gotten back together, arrive to fight Baron von Strucker, who is hiding out in Sokovia with the Maximoff twins. The Avengers conquer his base, and Tony Stark takes with him Loki's scepter. Tony and Banner experiment on the scepter until they discover it has an Infinity Stone in it, a stone that can create artificial intelligence. Tony plans to use this on his Avengers bots, since instead of using Jarvis, a computer program, the robots can be self-aware. This new program is called Ultron, and is quickly created. Ultron, an AI, is made to believe that he has to save the Earth. However, he feels that the only way to save the Earth is to destroy humanity. So Ultron takes out Jarvis, builds himself a body out of some dismantled Avengers bots, and goes to crash the victory party that the Avengers were having. While the Avengers destroy his version 1 body, he just uploads himself to the internet and takes a new one. Also, one of his helper robots steals Loki's scepter. Ultron goes to Hydra's Sokovia base, where he kills Strucker and upgrades himself to this. He also recruits the Maximoff twins, who from now on I'm just gonna refer to as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. They join the big bad robot because they still want revenge on Tony Stark. The 3 baddies go to Wakanda, which is in Africa, to get vibranium, that unbreakable substance. The Avengers meet them there and battle them, but Cap, Thor, and Black Widow are quickly subdued by Scarlet Witch. Hulk also gets controlled and goes on a rampage. Stark has to stop him using his Hulkbuster armor. Since they need time to get their strength back, the Avengers hide out on Hawkeye's farm with his wife and kids. Here they meet Nick Fury, and he gives them an inspirational speech. Ultron goes off to South Korea, where he forces the scientist to create a perfect android body for him. He even lasers the Infinity Stone out of Loki's scepter and puts it into the android's head. However, Scarlet Witch discovers Ultron's plan plans of destroying the Earth. She and her brother turn on him, and a fight ensues. The Avengers arrive and fight Ultron, while Stark uploads Jarvis into Ultron's perfect android body. Thanks to some lightning from Thor, who recently found out about all of these Infinity Stones, the android becomes the Vision, who fights with the Avengers. Ultron's plan to wipe out humans consists of lifting up a big chunk of Sokovia and crashing it down on Earth, like a giant meteor. The Avengers arrive on the floating city and battle Ultron and his thousands of Ultron bots. They managed to foil Ultron's plans and blow up the city, with the help of Nick Fury and his shiny new helicarrier. However, Quicksilver is killed along the way, and Hulk also flies off to God knows where in a little Quinjet. The final piece of Ultron is destroyed by Vision, and the Avengers start their new base, an Avengers Academy type thing, where Cap and Black Widow are going to train War Machine, Falcon, Scarlet Witch, and Vision into real Avengers. Stark goes off on his way, Thor goes off to find out more about the Infinity Stones, and Hawkeye goes back to chilling with his family. After all this craziness, a new-ish S.H.I.E.L.D. has been formed, and S.H.I.E.L.D. meets with Sky's mom at the Inhuman day camp, in order to get permission to put all of the Inhumans on the Index, basically keeping a record of all of them. Sky's mom is outraged by the proposal and kills the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who was talking to her, because I guess she's evil now, for some reason, which starts a war between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Inhumans. The Inhumans attack S.H.I.E.L.D., and in the epic battle that ensues, Gordon is killed, Sky's mom is killed, and Coulson gets his hand chopped off. So now, let's go back to Darren Cross, because why not? So Cross is now fully running Pymtech with Hank's daughter Hope, who's now all grown up, as his assistant. Cross invites Hank, who's been out and about for a while, to come and see his new project, known as the Yellow Jacket. The Yellow Jacket is like the Ant-Man tech, but it can fly and has lasers and can kill someone within seconds. Hank is pretty horrified to see that Cross has replicated such dangerous tech, even though he doesn't know the worst part, which is that Cross is planning to, surprise surprise, sell the Yellow Jacket to Hydra. Meanwhile, Scott Lang is released from his long prison sentence and goes back to living with his buddy, Luis. He's pretty bummed about his wife having a new husband and his daughter having a new father, so goes back to his life of crime. Thanks to a tip from Luis, he breaks into Hank Pym's mansion, only to find the Ant-Man suit, which of course he doesn't realize is capable of doing all these superpower things. Hank, who sees Scott breaking in, lets him take the suit, as he sees potential in him as someone who could help him stop Cross. Scott tries on the suit and is terrified after a near-death experience when he accidentally shrinks down. He tries to return the suit to Hank's mansion, but is caught by the police. Hank breaks him out of jail and tells him about Cross and the Ant-Man stuff, and recruits him to help against Cross. Hope, who is also not very happy about Cross making the Yellow Jacket, turns to her father's side to help against her boss, although at first she isn't very happy about working with Scott. Scott is then trained by Hank and Hope, and he eventually learns how to properly operate the Ant-Man suit, and how to communicate with ants. At one point during his training, he accidentally crashes at the new Avengers base. Fortunately, only Falcon is there keeping watch. Scott has a brief fight with him, and then manages to escape. After a bit more training, Hank sends Scott into Pymtech to steal the Yellow Jacket suit, but Cross is waiting for him. Cross shoots Hank in the shoulder, don't worry, he survives, gets in a chopper, and puts on the Yellow Jacket suit. Scott chases him, and they have a teeny tiny fight on the helicopter, eventually ending up at Scott's wife and daughter's house. Don't ask. They battle for a bit until Cross is about to kill Scott's daughter. Scott manages to kill Cross, but in the process is forced to go subatomic, just like Hank's wife. He keeps shrinking for a long time through the depths of the quantum realm until he figures out a way to escape, the science of which I won't delve into here. Scott is then prepared to continue his normal life, but Luis lets him know that he's gotten info that the Avengers want to recruit him, on the suggestion of the Falcon. We don't see it, but Scott probably accepts the offer. After all of these adventures, Hank shows Hope a new wasp suit he's designed for her, as he wants her to take on her mother's mantle. So now in some unknown location, Falcon has finally located Bucky after a lot of searching, and has momentarily immobilized him. He and Cap have him in place, and they debate whether they should call Tony. Cap doesn't want to because he doesn't trust him. Falcon then suggests they call Ant-Man. So now, finally, back in space. At this point, Thanos is pretty mad about all of his friends and servants not being able to get him his Infinity Stones, so he goes off and gets a hold of the Infinity Gauntlet and decides,
fine, I'll do it myself.
So there you go, the Marvel Cinematic Universe in chronological order again. Finally here after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Odds are I messed up one or two dates, or I messed up someone's name, or I missed something out, but this universe is gargantuan. It's hard to keep track of everything, so forgive me if I forgot something. And this whole interconnected universe is one of the coolest stories in all of film, how every movie links up with the last. Anyway, I'll save that for some other video. Be sure to hit the like button, check out my Instagram at BHL_Hudson, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.